I'm filing for divorce, Bronwyn. Kieran's voice was flat, devoid of the warmth that once made my world bloom. We were in Dr. Eris's sterile office, the faint hum of medical equipment, the only witness to my unraveling. Just moments before, Dr. Eris had explained the last, best hope for us to have a child. Surrogacy. My body, after years of trying and countless heartbreaks, simply couldn't carry a pregnancy to term. I'd looked at Kieran, hope flickering in my eyes, ready to embrace this new path, this new chance at the family we both said we desperately wanted. But instead of shared relief, I was met with a gaze so distant, so utterly empty. It felt like a stranger was sitting across from me. My hands, which had been clasped tightly in anticipation, dropped to my lap, trembling. The dream, which had been a fragile sapling, was now a shattered vase, its pieces scattering across the cold, clinical floor. Before we dive into this story, hit that like button and tell me in the comments, what's the toughest decision you ever had to make for love? Your stories mean the world to me. He didn't even look at me when he said it, his eyes fixed on some point beyond my shoulder, as if I were already invisible. Surrogacy is too complicated. Too much. Too much? Was having a family too much? Was I too much? The doctor, a kind woman named Dr. Eris, shifted uncomfortably in her chair, sensing the seismic shift in the room. She started to speak, a gentle query about understanding. But Kieran cut her off with a dismissive wave. His composure was chilling, a stark contrast to the earthquake erupting inside me. Every fiber of my being screamed, demanded an explanation, a reason. Anything to make sense of this sudden, brutal amputation of our life together. But my voice was trapped, a silent scream echoing in the hollow chambers of my chest. My mind reeled, trying to connect the dots between the man who swore eternal love and the man sitting before me, dismantling our future with a few careless words. Tears, hot and stinging, pricked at my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. Not here, not now, not in front of him. I clenched my jaw, tasting the metallic tang of defiance. This wasn't just about surrogacy. This was about everything. The late-night talks about nursery colors, the quiet promises whispered under starry skies, the comforting weight of his hand in mine as we navigated the maze of fertility treatments. It was all a lie, a cruel deception that had led me to this precipice. A bitter laugh almost escaped me. He didn't reject surrogacy. He rejected me. He rejected the future we'd painstakingly built, brick by agonizing brick. And the worst part? The devastating, soul-crushing part, was the sudden, dawning realization that he had probably been rejecting it, rejecting us, for a long time. My gaze finally locked onto his, a desperate plea for recognition, for the man I married to reappear. But his eyes were like polished stones, reflecting nothing of our shared history, our love, our pain. It was a look of complete detachment, a finality that pierced deeper than any insult. Dr. Eris, bless her compassionate soul, cleared her throat and mumbled something about privacy, excusing herself from the room. The door clicked shut, leaving us in a silence that was deafening, suffocating. I wanted to shake him, to scream at him, to beg him to remember the woman he'd vowed to cherish. But what was there to remember if he'd already forgotten? The air was thick with unspoken accusations, shattered dreams, and the cold, hard reality of a love that had inexplicably died. I want you out of the house by the end of the month, he stated, his voice still unnervingly calm, as if discussing a business transaction. The house we bought together, the home we filled with laughter and hope, the place where we dreamed of raising our children. It wasn't just the words. It was the chilling indifference with which they were delivered. My heart, already fractured, felt like it was crumbling into dust. How could someone who once loved me so fiercely become so utterly heartless? my vision blurred, not just from unshed tears, but from the sudden, terrifying uncertainty of my future. I stood up, my legs feeling like jelly, and without another word, I walked out of that office, leaving behind not just a failed dream, but the wreckage of my entire life, wondering what twisted game he was truly playing. It was a crisp autumn evening, leaves painted in fiery hues, when Kieran got down on one knee by the shimmering waters of Lake Serenity. He'd picked a spot we loved, a quiet cove where we often talked for hours, sharing dreams and secrets under a canopy of stars. His voice, usually so strong, trembled slightly as he held out a velvet box, the diamond inside catching the last rays of sunlight. "Bronwyn," he began, his eyes full of adoration. "You are my world, my everything. Will you make me the happiest man alive and be my wife?" I remember the warmth that flooded my chest, the sheer, intoxicating joy that made me believe in fairy tales. We had been together for 5 years already, navigating the easy flow of young love, then the deeper currents of committed partnership. His proposal wasn't a surprise, not really, but it was everything I had ever wished for. We met in college, two ambitious souls drawn together by a shared love for art history and late-night study sessions. Kieran was charming, with a quick wit and a smile that could melt glaciers. He made me laugh until my sides ached, and he listened with an intensity that made me feel truly seen. Our early years were a whirlwind of adventures. Road trips up the coast, exploring hidden cafes, dreaming aloud about our future. He often spoke of wanting a big family, all of children running through a sunlit yard. "I want to be a father more than anything," he'd confess, his eyes sparkling with a vision I eagerly shared. We were a team, a unit, our lives seamlessly intertwined. Every decision, big or small, was made together, with mutual respect and an unwavering belief in our shared path. After the wedding, our focus shifted to building our home, our sanctuary. We found a charming house with a sprawling garden, painting the walls together, picking out furniture, filling it with memories even before they were made. The desire for children grew stronger, a silent, persistent hum beneath the surface of our happy routine. We'd talk about names, decorate a spare room in our minds, imagine tiny hands grasping ours. When conceiving naturally became a struggle, we faced it together, holding hands through every doctor's appointment, every test, every disheartening result. "We'll get through this," he'd always say, squeezing my hand tight, his resolve mirroring mine. "Whatever it takes, Bronwyn, we'll be parents." His words were my anchor, his unwavering support the fuel that kept my hope burning, even through the darkest days of disappointment. I remembered one particularly difficult moment. After a failed IVF cycle, I was inconsolable, convinced my body was failing us. Kieran held me for hours, stroking my hair, letting me cry into his shoulder. "It's okay, my love," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "We're in this together. There are other ways. We'll explore every option. Adoption, surrogacy, whatever path leads us to our child, we'll take it. As long as I have you, we'll find a way." Those words, those promises, were etched into my soul. They were the foundation of our marriage, the bedrock of my trust in him. He made me feel strong, loved, and absolutely certain that no matter what challenges life threw our way, we would face them as one, united in our dream of parenthood. Now, standing in the sterile silence of Dr. Eris's office, those cherished memories felt like cruel echoes. The man who had pledged whatever it takes had just walked away from the very path he once promised to explore. The warmth of those autumn evenings, the joy of our shared dreams, the comfort of his steadfast love, all felt like illusions, dissolving into the cold, harsh reality of betrayal. What had changed? What twisted turn had our story taken that transformed a loving husband into a stranger capable of such chilling indifference? The memory of his ardent proposal, his unwavering promises, now felt like a bitter mockery, a ghost haunting the ruins of a life I thought was unshakable. And as I replayed his words from that night at Lake Serenity, a new, unsettling question began to form in my mind. Was he ever truly committed to those promises, or was it all just a performance? Looking back, the cracks started subtly, like hairline fractures in a beautiful vase. I was so consumed by our fertility journey, by the emotional roller coaster of hope and despair, that I didn't see the slow, insidious shift in Kieran. He'd still come to appointments, but his hand wouldn't squeeze mine as tightly. His eyes, once full of empathy, would sometimes glaze over, a distant look replacing the shared pain. He'd started working longer hours, claiming increased pressure at his architecture firm. At first, I understood, even encouraged him. We needed to save for treatments, for the eventual arrival of our child. But the longer hours began to stretch into late nights, then weekends. Our once vibrant evenings of cooking together, talking, or simply cuddling on the sofa, dwindled into quiet dinners alone for me, waiting for a husband who often arrived home after I'd already gone to bed. When he was home, his phone became a new, constant companion. He'd take calls in other rooms, or text incessantly, his thumb flying across the screen with an urgency he rarely showed towards me anymore. When I'd ask about it, he'd simply say, "Work stuff, Bronwyn. You wouldn't understand." Or sometimes, "Just catching up with friends." But the furtive glances, the way he'd quickly put his phone face down if I walked into the room, stirred a nagging unease within me. It wasn't outright suspicion at first, more a sense of being slowly pushed out of his world, replaced by something I couldn't quite grasp. Our conversations grew shorter, shallower, revolving mostly around my fertility treatments, which felt increasingly like a burden to him, rather than a shared pursuit. The turning point, though I didn't recognize it as such then, was after my last failed IVF cycle. It had been devastating. I remember collapsing onto the bathroom floor, the familiar wave of grief washing over me. Kieran found me there, but instead of holding me close like before, he stood awkwardly in the doorway. He mumbled something about not being able to do this anymore. Not the treatments, I thought then, but this level of emotional pain. His words, instead of offering comfort, felt like a judgment on my inability to cope, on my very brokenness. He left for the gym shortly after, leaving me alone with my tears and a growing sense of isolation. It was the first time I felt truly alone in our marriage, the first undeniable sign that the unwavering support I had relied on was no longer there. I tried to talk to him about it, to bridge the growing chasm. "Kieran, are you okay? We never talk anymore." "Not really." His responses were always vague, deflective. "I'm just stressed, Bronwyn. Work is demanding. We're going through a lot. It's understandable if things are a bit strained." He'd promised to make time, to reconnect, but those promises rarely materialized. Instead, he'd immerse himself in his projects, his phone, his mysterious friends, leaving me feeling like an increasingly desperate echo in our once vibrant home. I started to question myself, wondering if I was too needy, too consumed by our struggle. Perhaps I was pushing him away with my sadness, my unfulfilled longing for a child. The self-doubt gnawed at me, turning my focus inward, away from the subtle changes in his behavior that, in hindsight, screamed betrayal. His emotional withdrawal intensified in the weeks leading up to Dr. Aris's recommendation for surrogacy. He became almost cold, a polite stranger living in the same house. He'd nod, offer monosyllabic answers, and avoid eye contact. The physical intimacy, once a powerful current between us, had trickled to a hesitant, infrequent stream, then dried up almost entirely. I kept telling myself it was stress, that we were both under immense pressure, and that once we found a solution, once we had our baby, everything would go back to normal. But deep down, a chilling suspicion began to form, a whisper in the back of my mind that this wasn't just about stress or fertility. It was about something else, something far more sinister, something he was hiding, and the realization was a terrifying premonition of the storm that was about to break. The first time I heard the name Leora, it was from a passing comment Kieran made about a new colleague. "She's incredibly sharp, Bronwyn. Really good at networking." He'd said it so casually. Too casually, perhaps. Trying to make it sound insignificant. My intuition, dulled by years of emotional fatigue, still pricked slightly. He rarely spoke about specific colleagues, let alone complimented them so effusively. A week later, he mentioned Leora again, this time about a project they were collaborating on, requiring late nights at the office. "She's a real go-getter," he'd explained, avoiding my gaze. I remember a flicker of something unsettling in his eyes, something I couldn't quite decipher, but dismissed as my own anxiety, twisting normal interactions into something nefarious. Then came the little things, the almost imperceptible changes that, when strung together, painted a clearer, more disturbing picture. Kieran started taking more care with his appearance, buying new clothes, stylish, modern pieces that were a departure from his usual casual wardrobe. He'd meticulously style his hair before leaving for work, a habit he hadn't had since our early dating days. He even started wearing a new cologne, a scent that was definitely not the one I had bought him. A scent that smelled faintly of expensive wildflowers, and something sharp, almost metallic. When I commented on it, he'd brush it off. "Just trying a new look, Bronwyn. What's wrong with that?" His defensiveness was subtle, but it was there. A brittle edge to his voice. The biggest red flag, though, was his phone. It became an extension of his hand, constantly guarded, always face down. He developed a habit of taking it with him everywhere, even to the bathroom. One evening, as he showered, I heard a ping from his phone, which he'd uncharacteristically left on the bedside table. My heart pounded with a terrible premonition. I hesitated, battling my conscience. But the gnawing anxiety was too strong. I picked it up. It was locked, of course. But the lock screen flashed for a second, revealing a notification. "Leora, can't wait for our trip next month. Thinking of you." My breath caught in my throat. Trip? What trip? He hadn't mentioned any trip to me. The world tilted on its axis. The cold dread I'd felt in Dr. Eris's office suddenly had a name, a face, and a reason. My fingers trembled as I tried to unlock it, but his passcode was no longer our anniversary. He'd changed it. That small act of secrecy, changing something so personal, felt like a deeper cut than any message. It confirmed everything. The late nights, the distant gaze, the sudden divorce filing. It all clicked into place with sickening clarity. Leora. She wasn't just a colleague. She was the architect of my marital destruction. The pain was excruciating, a raw, burning wound in my chest. He hadn't just rejected surrogacy. He had replaced me. The man who promised me children, who swore to cherish me, was secretly planning a future with someone else, while I clung to the tattered remnants of our shared dream. I put the phone back exactly as I found it. My mind racing. A storm of fury and heartbreak brewing within me. The rage was a hot current, replacing the cold numbness. How long? How long had this been going on? Was the surrogacy rejection just a convenient excuse, a clean break for his new life? The betrayal was so complete, so callous, that it ignited a spark of something fierce and determined inside me. The tears I'd held back in Dr. Eris's office now threatened to spill, but I fought them back. No, not for him. Not for the man who so easily discarded our years, our love, our dreams. As Kieran emerged from the bathroom, whistling a cheerful tune, oblivious to the bomb that had just detonated in my world, I looked at him with new eyes. He was no longer my husband, but a stranger, a traitor. And in that moment, a silent vow formed in my heart. He wouldn't get away with this. Not cleanly. Not easily. Kieran's divorce petition arrived promptly, a stark, legal document designed to sever every tie we had. It was clean, concise, and utterly devoid of emotion, as if our 10 years together could be reduced to bullet points and clauses. He offered a surprisingly generous settlement for my half of the house, and a small alimony package, contingent on a swift, uncontested divorce. His eagerness for me to sign, to disappear quietly, was palpable. He wanted me out of his life, out of his way, so he could move on without complication. But after discovering Leora's message, my shock had solidified into a cold, hard resolve. I wasn't just grieving anymore. I was furious. I wasn't going to roll over and let him erase me. I hired Alara Vance, a formidable divorce attorney known for her sharp mind and even sharper tongue. Alara, with her piercing blue eyes and no-nonsense demeanor, listened to my story without interruption, her expression unreadable. When I finished, she simply nodded. He wants to make this quick and quiet, Bronwyn. That usually means he has something to hide, or someone he wants to protect. We'll find it. Her words, delivered with calm assurance, were a balm to my raw nerves. I told her about the surrogacy rejection, the timing, and then, hesitantly, about Leora and the trip next month. Alara's eyes narrowed. Ah, a third party. That changes things. Significantly. A tiny spark of hope, mixed with a bitter satisfaction, flickered within me. I wasn't just fighting for myself. I was fighting for justice. The first few weeks of legal maneuvering were brutal. Kieran's lawyers were aggressive, pushing for mediation, for a quick resolution. But Alara held firm, delaying, requesting more documentation, digging into Kieran's financials with relentless precision. She suspected he was understating his assets, funneling money elsewhere to protect it from the divorce settlement. Every day brought a new email, a new form, a new strategy. I felt like I was drowning in paperwork, reliving every painful memory through legal jargon. But Alara was my lifeline, explaining every step, empowering me with knowledge. She made me realize this wasn't just about money. It was about reclaiming my dignity, about showing him that I was not a disposable part of his life. During one particularly draining phone call, Alara asked, "Did Kieran ever talk about children being a deal-breaker for him, Bronwyn? Specifically, not being able to have his own biological child?" The question hit me. He had always expressed a strong desire for kids, but he'd never emphasized the biological part quite so overtly, not with me. He'd always said, our child, our family. But now, remembering his sudden rejection of surrogacy, it twisted my gut. Was it always about his genetics, his legacy, and not truly about building a family with me? This new perspective opened up a deeper wound, making his betrayal feel even more personal, more calculated. It wasn't just a sudden change of heart. It was a fundamental shift in his understanding of our shared future, or perhaps, a fundamental lie he'd been living. Alara's investigation soon uncovered a trail of suspicious financial activity, large, undisclosed transfers to an offshore account, and a shell corporation set up just months prior. It was complex, clearly designed to obscure the true beneficiary. "He's hiding money, Bronwyn," Alara confirmed, her voice grim. "And my guess is, it's not just for a rainy day fund. This looks like a strategic move. Premeditated." My heart pounded. This wasn't just a breakup. It was a planned escape. And I was merely collateral damage. But within the shock, a new resolve hardened. He thought he was smart, untouchable. But he underestimated me. He underestimated Alara. He underestimated the power of a woman scorned, who was now fighting not just for justice, but for the very essence of her worth. Alara's relentless digging into Kieran's finances began to yield disturbing results, pulling back the curtain on a carefully constructed facade. The offshore account, the shell corporation, they weren't just for hiding assets from our divorce. They were intricately linked to a much larger, more secretive venture. A substantial portion of his income, far more than he had ever admitted, was being funneled into a private fertility clinic, one specializing in advanced reproductive technologies, including a highly secretive embryo creation and storage program. The clinic wasn't just anywhere. It was located halfway across the world, in a country with lax privacy laws, making it incredibly difficult to trace without the right legal leverage. The implications hit me like a physical blow. He wasn't rejecting surrogacy because it was too complicated, or too much. He was rejecting it because he already had another plan in motion, a plan he had meticulously kept from me. A plan that involved creating embryos without me, without my knowledge, potentially with another woman's genetic material, or even through anonymous donors. My stomach churned with a mixture of disbelief and profound disgust. The image of him, so stoic and dismissive in Dr. Eris's office, now morphed into a grotesque caricature of a schemer, a manipulator. He hadn't just moved on. He had been actively creating an entirely separate life, a separate future, while I was still clinging to the wreckage of ours. Elara, ever the pragmatist, explained the legal complexities. If he's created embryos with another woman, or even donor material, without your consent or knowledge while still married, that opens up a whole new legal avenue. It speaks to a level of premeditation, Bronwyn, that will be damning in court. Her words were cold comfort, but they fueled a righteous anger within me. This wasn't just a simple case of infidelity and divorce anymore. It was a calculated deception, an emotional and financial betrayal of staggering proportions. He hadn't just filed for divorce. He had been actively trying to erase our shared future by building a clandestine one, ensuring his legacy, his biological children, without any input or presence from me. The deepest cut, the most agonizing realization, was the timing. The dates on the financial transfers, the establishment of the shell corporation, the initial consultations with the overseas clinic, they all predated Dr. Eris's surrogacy recommendation. They even predated some of our most painful fertility treatments. He had been lying to me, looking me in the eye, promising whatever it takes, while secretly orchestrating his exit strategy. A future where I was entirely absent. He allowed me to suffer through countless procedures, endure endless heartbreak, all while he was already laying the groundwork for a life without me. A life with children that were biologically his, but not ours. The sheer audacity, the cruelty of it, left me breathless. We need to get to the bottom of this, Elara stated, her voice firm. We need to identify the other party involved, if there is one, or at least confirm the existence and nature of these embryos. She laid out a new legal strategy, far more aggressive than before. This wasn't just about securing a fair divorce settlement anymore. It was about exposing his deception, holding him accountable for the elaborate web of lies he had woven. The pain was still immense, a constant throb in my chest. But it was now laced with an unyielding resolve. Kieran thought he could simply discard me and walk away into his secretly constructed new life. But he had fundamentally underestimated the woman he married. He was about to learn that some wounds, once exposed, demand more than just healing. They demand justice. The day of our mandated mediation session arrived, thick with tension. It was held in a neutral office, a sterile box, designed to encourage compromise. But I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that compromise was not in Kieran's vocabulary, nor mine. He walked in, impeccably dressed, a picture of calm confidence. Leora was not with him, but her spectral presence filled the room. His eyes, as they met mine across the polished table, held a flicker of something I couldn't quite place. Apprehension? Annoyance? Definitely not regret. Elara sat beside me, a silent, formidable guardian, her presence a steadying anchor. The mediator, a weary-looking woman named Miss Albright, started with pleasantries, attempting to establish common ground. Kieran, ever the polished professional, maintained his composure, speaking in clipped, lawyerly tones about irreconcilable differences and mutual desire for an amicable separation. But Alara cut through the facade like a surgical knife. "Mr. Thorne," she began, her voice deceptively soft, "my client has reason to believe that your rejection of surrogacy was not merely a change of heart, but part of a premeditated plan to terminate your marriage and pursue other reproductive avenues, unbeknownst to her." Kieran's jaw tightened. The calm facade began to crack. Then Alara laid out the evidence, piece by damning piece. The offshore account, the shell corporation, the significant transfers to the overseas fertility clinic, the dates predating the divorce filing, and even my last IVF cycle. She watched him closely, letting each revelation sink in. The color drained from his face, and his carefully constructed composure finally shattered. He looked from Alara to me, his eyes wide with a mixture of shock and fury. "This is a fabrication," he spat, his voice rising, his hands clenching into fists under the table. "You're trying to slander me, Bronwyn, just to get more money." But his denial lacked conviction. It was the desperate flailing of a man caught in his own trap. "Is Leora involved in this fertility plan, Mr. Thorne?" Alara pressed, her voice sharp now. The mention of her name seemed to drain the last vestiges of strength from him. He visibly slumped. He stared at the table, then finally, slowly, lifted his eyes to mine. You went through my phone?" he whispered, not denying anything, only fixating on my transgression. "That's how you found out?" His confession was not in words, but in that quiet admission of guilt, that desperate attempt to deflect. The anger that had been simmering within me boiled over. It wasn't just about Leora. It was about the years of lies, the calculated deception, the way he had strung me along, while building a secret life. "Tell me, Kieran." I finally spoke, my voice trembling with a raw edge I didn't recognize. "Were you always planning this? Were you just waiting for my body to fail so you'd have an excuse to discard me and pursue your own biological children elsewhere?" The question hung in the air, heavy with accusation. He flinched, then closed his eyes. A flicker of something almost like shame crossing his face, before it hardened into defiance. I wanted children. Bronwyn. My own children. You couldn't give them to me." His words were a dagger, twisting in the deepest wound. He made it sound like my fault, my failure, my brokenness. He confirmed everything. His genetic obsession, his contempt for our shared struggle, and his monstrous plan to abandon me for a life he had secretly engineered. I stared at him, the man I married, and saw only a stranger, a cruel architect of my heartbreak, who had just confirmed a deeper, more chilling lie than I could have ever imagined. The confrontation and mediation, though devastating, gave us a crucial advantage. Kieran's outburst, his thinly veiled confession, and the revealed financial subterfuge fundamentally shifted the landscape of the divorce proceedings. Alara wasted no time. We now had grounds to expose his calculated fraud and emotional distress. His carefully constructed image, both personal and professional, was at stake. She immediately filed motions to freeze his offshore accounts and subpoena records from the overseas fertility clinic, citing marital misconduct and fraudulent concealment of assets. The legal battle escalated from a typical divorce to a high-stakes war, with Kieran's reputation and financial future hanging precariously in the balance. Kieran's lawyers, now visibly rattled, tried to backtrack, to mitigate the damage. They argued that the fertility clinic was merely an investment, unrelated to personal reproductive plans, and that the offshore accounts were for legitimate business dealings. But Alara had meticulously pieced together the timeline, correlating his increasing distance from me with the substantial financial transfers and the establishment of the shell company. The evidence painted a clear picture of premeditation. His initial offer of a generous settlement now looked like a desperate attempt to buy my silence, to sweep his elaborate deception under the rug before it could be uncovered. But it was too late. I was no longer interested in silence. I was interested in justice. The stress was immense. I barely ate, barely slept, the betrayal replaying in my mind like a cruel loop. But beneath the pain, a steel resolve had formed. This wasn't just about me anymore. This was about principle, about holding someone accountable for such a heartless act of manipulation. I spent hours with Alara, going over every detail, every memory, no matter how painful, to strengthen our case. We discussed the psychological impact of his actions, the years of emotional investment in a dream he was actively sabotaging. The legal proceedings became a grueling process of uncovering truth, of shining a harsh light on his duplicity. The subpoenas eventually forced the overseas clinic to release information. What we found was damning. Kieran had indeed started a process to create embryos, using donor eggs and his own sperm. The plan was meticulously detailed, including potential gestational surrogates for these embryos. The paperwork confirmed that the entire process had begun before he even filed for divorce, and critically, while he was still claiming to be committed to our shared journey to parenthood. There was no mention of me, no acknowledgement of our marriage, or our attempts to conceive. It was a completely separate, secret life he was building. A future deliberately devoid of my presence. The proof was irrefutable. The revelation of the clinic's records broke Kieran's resistance. The threat of public exposure, of his professional reputation being ruined, was a risk he couldn't afford. He was an architect, his career built on trust and integrity. The scandal of such a calculated personal betrayal would destroy him. His lawyers, facing irrefutable evidence of fraud and marital misconduct, advised him to settle, and to settle big. The tables had turned. He, who had sought to discard me quietly and cheaply, was now cornered, facing the very public humiliation he had tried so desperately to avoid. The feeling wasn't triumph. Not exactly. But a deep, quiet satisfaction that the truth had finally emerged, and the architect of my heartbreak was about to pay a very steep price. The final settlement negotiation was tense, but the power dynamics had irrevocably shifted. Kieran, once so arrogant and composed, looked haggard, his eyes shadowed with defeat. Leora was notably absent, a sign, I suspected, of the pressure his betrayal was now putting on his new relationship. Alara, with a stack of damning evidence at her side, dictated terms. The division of assets was heavily skewed in my favor. I received a significant portion of his hidden wealth, more than half of the marital assets, and a substantial alimony package that would ensure my financial independence for years to come. But the most satisfying part wasn't the money. It was the public acknowledgement of his marital misconduct. A clause was added to the divorce decree, explicitly stating his fraudulent concealment of assets and his premeditated actions regarding the overseas fertility clinic while still married. It wouldn't make headlines, but it would be on public record, a permanent stain on his carefully crafted image. It was a quiet victory, but a profound one. It was justice, delivered not with sensationalism, but with the cold, hard weight of legal truth. I looked at Kieran across the table, no longer with love, nor even with intense hatred, but with a detached pity for a man who had sacrificed so much, his integrity, his first marriage, his reputation, all for a selfish, secretive pursuit of a biological heir. As the papers were signed, a wave of exhaustion washed over me, but it was quickly followed by an exhilarating sense of liberation. The legal battle was over. The chains of his deception were broken. I was free. I walked out of that office building with Alara by my side, feeling lighter than I had in years. The weight of his betrayal, the grief for our lost future, the agonizing hope for a child, it all started to lift. The air felt crisper, the sunlight brighter. I had not just survived. I had fought, and I had won. Not a victory born of revenge, but one forged in the crucible of self-respect and the unwavering pursuit of truth. The first thing I did was sell the house, our house. It held too many ghosts, too many shattered dreams. With the proceeds from the sale and my significant settlement, I bought a small, sun-drenched cottage by the coast. A place where the rhythmic crash of waves could wash away the lingering echoes of my pain. It was a blank canvas, ready to be filled with new memories, new hopes, and a future entirely of my own design. I enrolled in art classes, rekindled old friendships, and started volunteering at a local animal shelter. Slowly, painstakingly, I began to rebuild my life, brick by brick, not of shared dreams, but of individual purpose. One evening, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and purple, I realized something profound. Kieran's rejection, his cruel betrayal, had, in a twisted way, saved me. It had forced me to confront my own strength, to redefine my identity not as a wife or a mother-to-be, but as Bronwyn, whole, resilient, and capable of profound happiness, independent of any man or any predefined path. The longing for a child still existed, a soft ache in my heart, but it was no longer a desperate, all-consuming need. It was a possibility, one of many beautiful possibilities that now lay before me. The world, once a narrow tunnel focused on a single outcome, had expanded into a vast, open landscape of potential. I was no longer defined by what I had lost, but by what I had bravely reclaimed, myself. Life in the coastal cottage unfolded with a gentle rhythm, a stark contrast to the frantic pace of my previous existence. I spent mornings walking on the beach, collecting seashells, letting the salty air clear my mind. The art classes became a sanctuary, a place where I could channel my emotions, both joy and residual sorrow, onto canvas. My paintings, once muted and melancholic, began to burst with vibrant colors, reflecting the slow blooming of my spirit. I found solace in the simple act of creation, of bringing something beautiful into the world with my own hands, something that was entirely mine. My friendships, neglected during the intensity of fertility treatments and the subsequent divorce, blossomed anew. My friend, Clara, visited often, her unwavering support a steady beacon. We'd sit on my porch, sipping tea, sharing stories, and laughing until our sides ached. For the first time in years, I felt truly seen, truly cherished, not for what I could give or achieve, but simply for who I was. The isolation that had crept into my marriage had given way to a vibrant community of support, reminding me that love, in its many forms, was still abundant in my life. One afternoon, while volunteering at the animal shelter, a scruffy, three-legged terrier mix with soulful eyes stole my heart. I named him Finn. Bringing him home was a joyful chaos. Finn filled the quiet cottage with playful barks, wagging tails, and an unconditional love that was a powerful balm to my still healing heart. He was a constant reminder of resilience, of finding joy and purpose even after hardship. Caring for him, nurturing him back to full health and happiness, became a small, yet profound, act of healing for myself. He taught me that family comes in many forms, and that love can mend even the most broken parts of you. I also began to explore the idea of fostering children. The thought had always been in the back of my mind, a quiet whisper that had been drowned out by the intense pursuit of biological parenthood. Now, without the pressure, without Kieran's genetic obsession, the idea felt right, organic. I started researching local programs, attending informational sessions, feeling a gentle pull towards a different kind of motherhood. It wasn't about filling a void. It was about opening my heart, about giving a child a safe, loving home, even if for a temporary period. The process was daunting. For the first time, I felt genuinely excited about a future I was building, one rooted in compassion and purpose, not desperation. As I sat on my porch one evening, Finn curled up at my feet, watching the stars emerge, I thought about Kieran. I had heard whispers through mutual acquaintances. His new relationship with Leora was reportedly rocky, strained by his financial setbacks and the public whispers of his past deception. The secret children he sought to create in an overseas clinic remained elusive, stuck in legal limbo. He had achieved his separation, but at a cost far greater than he had anticipated. There was no joy in his downfall, only a quiet understanding that karma, in its own way, had delivered its verdict. My own path, however, felt clear, expansive, and filled with a profound sense of peace. I was no longer running from the past. I was walking confidently into a future I had shaped with my own hands and heart. Months turned into a year, then two. My life had settled into a rhythm of peace and productivity. My art was gaining recognition in local galleries. Finn was my constant, loving companion, and I was deeply involved in fostering. I had taken in two wonderful children, a brother and sister named Ronan and Maeve, whose laughter now echoed through the cottage. Their presence filled my home, and my heart, with a joy I never thought possible. They were not my own biological children in Kieran's rigid definition, but they were my children, loved fiercely and unconditionally. They were my family, and our bond was as real and powerful as any. Then, one rainy afternoon, my phone rang with an unfamiliar number. I almost didn't answer, but something compelled me. "It was Alara," she said, her voice softer than usual. "I have some news about Kieran. And Leora." My heart gave a strange lurch, a mixture of apprehension and an almost detached curiosity. I hadn't thought about him in months, the pain having receded into a dull ache, replaced by the vibrant reality of my new life. Alara explained that Kieran and Leora had gone through a messy breakup. The constant legal troubles, his financial woes, and the enduring shadow of his prior deception had finally taken their toll. Leora had moved on, leaving him alone to navigate the wreckage of his choices. But that wasn't all. Alara revealed that the overseas fertility clinic, facing further legal challenges and ethical concerns about its practices, had closed down. Kieran's stored embryos, the ones he had so ruthlessly pursued, were now in legal limbo, their fate uncertain. He had invested so much, betrayed so much, for a dream that had ultimately dissolved into nothingness. He had sacrificed his marriage, his reputation, and now, even his carefully constructed plan for a biological family had crumbled. He was facing professional setbacks too, his once stellar career now marred by whispers of his past dishonesty. He had achieved his divorce, yes, but at what profound and devastating cost. A strange feeling washed over me. It wasn't triumph, not glee, but a profound sadness for a man who had lost his way. He had chosen a path of deceit and selfishness, believing it would lead him to happiness, to his perfect family. Instead, it had led him to isolation and loss. He had rejected connection, rejected love, in favor of a narrow, self-serving definition of fatherhood. I realized then that my healing wasn't about him suffering. It was about me, thriving. His downfall didn't bring me joy, but it confirmed the justice that had been served, the truth that had ultimately prevailed. As I hung up the phone, Ronan, a mischievous 5-year-old, burst into the room, holding up a drawing of our cottage, complete with a stick figure family, me, him, Maeve, and a very round Finn. "Look, Mama Bronwyn," he exclaimed, his eyes shining. "It's us, Mama Bronwyn." The words, uttered with such innocence and love, resonated deep within my soul. I knelt down and hugged him tight, a powerful surge of love filling my chest. I had my children. I had my family, and it was a family built on love, resilience, and open hearts, not on bloodlines or carefully constructed deceptions. Kieran's choices had led him to an empty future, while mine, though painful at first, had led me to a richness of life I could never have imagined. Years later, my little coastal cottage was no longer just a house. It was a vibrant home, filled with laughter, art, and the comforting chaos of family life. Ronan and Maeve had thrived under my care, blossoming into bright, confident teenagers. I had officially adopted them a few years prior, a moment that remains one of the proudest and most joyous of my life. My art career had soared, my paintings now exhibited in galleries far beyond our small town, each piece imbued with the resilience and renewed hope I had found. Finn, now an old, wise dog, still curled up by my feet, his presence a quiet, comforting constant. One unusually warm autumn day, a letter arrived. The handwriting on the envelope was unfamiliar, yet a chill ran down my spine. It was from Kieran. I hadn't heard from him directly since the divorce. My hands trembled slightly as I opened it. It was a short letter, devoid of legal jargon, written in a shaky hand that barely resembled his once confident script. He was unwell, gravely so, and wanted to apologize. He wrote of his regrets, of the profound emptiness he felt, having lost everything he truly valued, our shared dreams, our love, and ultimately, his own fabricated vision of a family. He admitted his choices were fueled by a selfish, misguided obsession with his own bloodline, an obsession that had cost him his happiness and left him utterly alone. He mentioned seeing my art, reading about my life in the local paper, and realizing the depth of his folly. He saw the family I had built, the love that radiated from my life, and understood the true meaning of fatherhood and family, a meaning he had completely misunderstood and rejected. He wasn't asking for forgiveness, he wrote, only for me to know that he understood the magnitude of his mistakes. He knew he didn't deserve redemption, but he needed to confess the truth, to acknowledge the pain he had caused, before his time ran out. The letter ended with a simple, stark sentence. You deserved so much more, Bronwyn. You always did. I sat with the letter for a long time, the paper crinkling in my hands. The old wounds, though long healed, gave a faint throb, only a profound sense of closure. He had finally seen the truth, not through legal pressure, but through the bitter lens of his own loneliness. His confession, though late, offered a final piece of healing, a confirmation that I was never the broken one, but the one who endured, rebuilt, and triumphed. It wasn't about him seeking forgiveness from me, but about him finally facing himself. Later that day, as Ronan and Maeve chattered about their school day, filling the kitchen with their vibrant energy, I looked at them, then out at the ocean, glittering under the setting sunday. I tucked Kieran's letter away, a final relic of a past that no longer defined me. My life was here, now, in the warmth of my children's laughter, the comfort of Finn's gentle snores, and the vibrant colors of my art. I had navigated the treacherous waters of betrayal and heartbreak, and emerged not only intact, but stronger, wiser, and more loving than ever before. My story wasn't one of being rejected. It was one of self-discovery, resilience, and the unforgettable power of choosing love in all its beautiful, unexpected forms, to build a future that was truly, incandescently mine. Thank you for listening to this story of betrayal, revenge, and ultimately, healing. If this story moved you, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more tales of family betrayal.